She was halfway to the door, red wine dripping from her dress, laughter tearing through the marble hall like thunder, when a deep, commanding voice cut through the noise. "She's with me." Every glass stilled mid-air, every head turned in stunned silence, as Dominic Wells stepped forward from the shadows, his presence freezing the entire ballroom. In that moment, the woman they had mocked became the most powerful person in the room. Charlotte Hayes stood just outside the grand archway of Halberton Manor, the marble steps beneath her worn flats gleaming under the low golden lights of the evening. Her fingers trembled slightly as they clutched a soft, creased envelope, the ink on the front spelling her name in a neat, looping hand. It wasn't printed on heavy stock. There was no shimmering gold trim, no embossed crest. Just sincerity and a quiet promise from a charity organizer who had seen what few had. A teacher in the Bronx who had quietly emptied her savings account to support a literacy fund for underprivileged children. Tonight's gala was supposed to be about them, the kids. Not gowns, not glitz. She took a breath and stepped inside. The scent of jasmine and aged scotch hit her first. Then the glimmer of chandeliers so large they looked like they could crush planets. Violin music swirled through the air, light and practiced, while laughter echoed like champagne flutes clinking in unison. Women floated by in dresses that shimmered like wet glass, every strand of hair in place, every jewel carefully chosen. Men leaned against fluted columns in tuxedos that likely cost more than her yearly salary. Charlotte's simple ivory linen dress skimmed her ankles gently. She had picked it because it reminded her of spring mornings and calm Sunday church services. Her flats were clean but scuffed at the toes, softened by years of standing in front of chalkboards and kneeling beside children learning to read. Her dark curls were pinned back in a soft knot, a few strands curling around her cheekbones. She wore no makeup except for a clear balm, and she carried no purse, just a letter. She approached the check-in table, smiling politely. A hostess with a high ponytail and a black silk dress glanced up from her tablet. Her eyes flicked from Charlotte's shoes to her dress, to the envelope in her hand, then back to her shoes again. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone already preparing for dismissal. Charlotte offered the envelope, her voice calm. "I'm Charlotte Hayes. I received this invitation in the mail. I'm a donor." The hostess didn't take the envelope. She tapped on her screen. "We're only checking in names from the digital guest list. No one gets in without confirmation." Charlotte unfolded the letter, showing her name and the handwritten signature from the organizer. The hostess barely glanced at it. "We don't accept paper." "You must have misunderstood." A man nearby snorted into his cocktail. "Did she say paper?" he said loudly, elbowing the woman beside him, who burst into laughter. Charlotte tried again. "I was invited. I donated to the Children's Fund." The hostess stepped to the side and waved toward security. "Please step aside for real guests. You're making people uncomfortable." People were beginning to notice. Eyes turned, amused and curious. A woman in a satin cobalt blue gown leaned toward her date. "Is that linen?" she whispered, not quietly enough. Her date laughed. Maybe she thought this was a PTA potluck. Another voice piped in, a younger man in a crushed velvet blazer holding a glass of bourbon. "Or a soup kitchen. Does she even know where she is?" The laughter came in waves now. Phones rose, recording her. The glare of a dozen flashes stung her eyes. Charlotte stood still. She didn't flinch, didn't speak. She just held the letter in front of her like a fragile shield. Her silence only provoked more. A woman in emerald green silk, tall and sharp-featured, circled her slowly. "Honey," she said, her voice dripping condescension, "this party is for people who matter. Maybe try the coat room or the service entrance next time." Someone behind her giggled. "She looks like she's here to clean." A tray of canapes passed by. The woman in green made a show of stumbling, knocking the tray so that shrimp and sauce flew across Charlotte's bodice. The crowd gasped. Then laughed. "Oops," the woman cooed. "So clumsy of me." The music didn't pause. But something in the room shifted. It became more than mockery, it became theater. A ritual. Someone else tossed champagne at her sleeve. Another voice shouted, "She's a walking charity case. Bet she's here for the free food. That dress, who even wears that in public?" Charlotte stood firm. Her face calm. Her knuckles white around the letter. She stared at the massive chandelier above, the way the crystals caught light and reflected it onto every cruel face below. She wasn't invisible anymore, but she wasn't seen either. She was a joke. A security guard in a tight black suit stepped forward. "Ma'am, we've received complaints. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." She turned to him, offering the letter one last time. "Please, just read it." He didn't. He reached for her arm. "Let's not make this a scene." Another guard joined, grinning. Too late. The guests clapped mockingly as she was pulled toward the entrance. Her heel slid on the marble, the squeak echoing louder than the violins. A napkin fluttered to the floor beside her. A woman laughed. "Pick it up, sweetheart. You dropped your dignity." Charlotte's chest ached. Not from the wine, or the sauce, or the humiliation, but from the weight of what she'd hoped this night would be. She'd imagined a room of people who cared. Who gave back. Who understood what it meant to give everything for children who had nothing. And instead, she got this. Red wine now soaked the bottom of her dress. Her hair had come loose. Her flats, once quiet, now squelched faintly against the marble. She said nothing. She didn't cry. Didn't beg. And then, just as the doors opened before her and the night air brushed her skin, a voice. Deep. Measured. Cold. It cut through the chatter like a blade. "She's with me." Everything stopped. The music stuttered. The guards froze mid-step. Charlotte blinked. And slowly, she turned around. The crowd turned too, heads craning, glasses lowered. Standing at the top of the stairway that led into the ballroom, beneath the golden arch, was a man in a sharp black suit. Broad-shouldered. Tall. Hair dark, face unreadable. Eyes like cut steel. His name whispered through the room like a current. Dominic Wells. No one had known he would be here. He never came to public events. Not even his own. But now he was here. And he was walking, no, storming, toward the guards. Toward Charlotte. His voice, low and dangerous, echoed again. "Let go of my wife." The guards released her arm like it had burned them. Silence thundered in the hall. Charlotte stared at him. And in his eyes, she found no pity. Only fury. For her. For what they'd done. He reached her in 5 long strides and took her hand, not carefully, but protectively. Like it was the only thing anchoring him. "This," he said, turning to face the sea of stunned, horrified faces, "is Charlotte Wells. My wife. The woman you just publicly degraded because she didn't wear sequins or drop 6 figures on a dress." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The words landed like hammers. He looked down at Charlotte's wine-stained dress. Then back at the crowd. "She's the reason this charity has books this year. Computers. Heating for winter. She's the one who gave everything, while you laughed and drank and filmed it like she was entertainment." Murmurs rose like smoke. Guilt, confusion, panic. Charlotte's fingers tightened around his hand. Her heart was pounding, but her face stayed calm. He turned to her, his voice soft now, just for her. "You okay?" She nodded. "Barely." And together, they turned, walking back into the ballroom. The same people who had laughed at her now parted in silence. Phones lowered. Whispers died. Her stained linen dress brushed against sequins and satin, and none of it mattered. Because now, she wasn't just the woman they mocked. She was the mirror they couldn't look away from. And she was just getting started. The marble floor seemed to still beneath Charlotte's feet, as if even the building itself had paused to breathe. One moment she was nothing more than a joke, just a woman in flats and linen, dragged across polished stone like a stain someone wanted to scrub out of existence, and the next, she was standing at the eye of a storm. The music had gone quiet. The laughter had died in a single heartbeat. All because of a voice. Low, calm, and absolute. "She's with me." The words echoed like a judge's gavel in that towering ballroom. It came from the staircase that overlooked the main hall, from a man in an obsidian suit who now descended with the same gravity as thunder rolling over a field. Guests parted instinctively, like leaves swept aside by wind they couldn't see but felt in their bones. Charlotte turned her head slowly, still unsure if she'd imagined it. Her heels squeaked faintly against the floor, the sound sharp in the new silence. Then she saw him. Dominic Wells. There were gasps, sharp intakes of breath, murmurs like ripples after a stone breaks glassy water. Some guests blinked as if trying to make sure it was really him. Dominic Wells, the elusive billionaire tech titan, whose face appeared less in magazines than in quarterly reports. The man behind Wells Core Systems, the AI infrastructure that ran half the city's digital systems, whose name opened boardroom doors and closed billion-dollar deals. He was the kind of man who didn't do galas. Didn't do photos. Didn't need to. And yet there he was. Moving across the marble like the floor itself recognized his weight. And the only thing more shocking than him being there was the way his eyes locked onto her. Charlotte. He didn't stop. Didn't look around. Didn't acknowledge the whispers or the panic beginning to bloom in polished chests and pearl-draped throats. He walked straight to her and gently took her hand, the same one that had held the crumpled invitation, now trembling with shock. His fingers were warm. Grounding. "Let go of my wife," he said again, this time looking directly at the taller of the two guards who had seized her earlier. The man dropped her arm like it was radioactive. His partner took an unconscious step back. The guests stood in stunned silence, many holding phones that had moments earlier captured her humiliation but now hung by their sides, suddenly useless. Charlotte opened her mouth, but Dominic raised his hand slightly, not to silence her but to tell her, "I've got this." Then he turned his gaze on the room, on them, and his voice didn't rise, didn't tremble, but it struck the air like cold steel. "This woman, my wife, was invited tonight. She gave more to this charity than anyone in this room. Not in dollar amounts, maybe, but in sacrifice. She gave everything." His words weren't poetic, but they didn't need to be. They were raw. True. And that was more dangerous than any performance. And you all treated her like dirt because her dress didn't glitter. Because her shoes weren't made in Italy. Because she carried an envelope instead of a barcode. He scanned the faces before him, some pale, some flushed, all caught. You mocked the person who helped make this entire night possible. Dominic paused. You could hear the air leave people's lungs. No one laughed now. A woman near the front adjusted her clutch with shaky hands. A man in a velvet blazer, yes, that man, lowered his gaze to the floor like a student who'd been caught cheating. Charlotte stood quietly beside him, still stained in shrimp sauce and red wine, but she didn't shrink back. Her spine was straight. Her shoulders square. Her silence no longer passive, but powerful. Dominic stepped slightly forward. "This gala," he said, eyes sweeping the room again, "was supposed to be about helping children. The kind of kids my wife teaches every day in a school where heating fails in winter and textbooks still mention floppy disks. While most of you," he paused, "sip cocktails and congratulate yourselves for attending." There it was. A punch without yelling. Shame that cut deeper than any insult. He looked down at Charlotte. She didn't ask to be thanked. She didn't even tell me she donated until I saw the letter at home. She didn't come for recognition, she came because she believed it might make a difference. He turned again, slower this time. "And you dragged her across this floor for it." The hostess who had waved her away earlier stood frozen, her tablet still glowing in her hands, but her face had gone white. A woman in a green silk gown, the one who had tossed wine like it was confetti, stepped back behind a floral centerpiece as if it could hide her. And Vanessa Remy, the Gala's co-chair and unofficial queen bee of Manhattan's high society, stood still as stone, her trademark red lipstick suddenly too bright against her pale cheeks. Dominic looked at the organizers near the stage. "She'll be staying," he said flatly. Then he turned to Charlotte, offering her his arm. "If you still want to." Charlotte looked up at him. Her hand squeezed his gently. And then, with grace that no designer could stitch into fabric, she nodded. "I do," she said, her voice steady. They walked together back into the ballroom. And this time, no one blocked their path. Guests stepped aside like ghosts, their eyes darting, their smiles vanished. The chandeliers sparkled above them, but none of their light could erase what had just happened. A waiter, red-faced and trembling, approached with a silver tray. "Mrs. Wells," he stammered, would you like something to drink?" Charlotte gave him a kind smile, as if none of it had touched her. "Just water, thank you." He nodded so quickly his glasses nearly slipped from his nose, and he rushed off. They took a seat at a central table, the one reserved for the Gala's most honored guests. The white silk tablecloth shimmered beneath the lights. Charlotte settled into her chair, her hands folded neatly, her composure unshaken. Dominic sat beside her, his presence like a fortress. Moments later, one of the event coordinators approached the table. A petite woman in a black cocktail dress, her voice shaky. "Mrs. Wells," she said, "I'm Rebecca, on the charity board. We didn't know about your donation. It's extraordinary. Would you allow us to recognize you tonight?" Charlotte looked at her. Then at the room. Then back again. "No," she said softly. "Mention the kids. They're the ones who matter." Rebecca blinked, then nodded quickly, swallowing hard. "Of course. Yes. The children." She stepped away, her voice already whispering to the MC at the podium. The rest of the evening moved in strange silence. Music resumed, but it no longer floated, it stumbled. Conversations resumed, but they were hushed, clipped. People glanced Charlotte's way and then quickly looked down at their plates. Some tried to smile. Some tried to excuse themselves. Others whispered behind napkins, eyes wide. Dominic stayed close. Protective. Present. Not once did he let go of her hand. Not once did he look away. Charlotte thought of her students. Of Layla and Jamal and little Marco, who always forgot his lunch but never forgot to share his crayons. She thought of their faces when she told them stories, and of how hard they were trying to dream bigger than their neighborhood allowed. And she knew, right then, that this moment wasn't about gowns or money or power. It was about being seen. Finally. Truly. And she had been. Not by the room, but by the one who mattered. Later, as dessert was cleared and the final item of the night was auctioned off, a weekend on a private island, Charlotte remained silent, her presence a soft rebuke to everything the Gala had become. But when the host took the stage and announced a new donation for the school literacy fund, Charlotte's cause, the applause was different. Not loud. Not forced. But respectful. Measured. Real. The woman they had dragged out had returned, not with revenge, but with grace. And in doing so, she reminded everyone that true dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't glitter. It stands. Quiet. Unshaken. And unforgettable. The air inside Halberton Manor hung heavy as Charlotte sat with her back straight, the wine-stained hem of her linen dress quietly draped beneath the table's silk cover. Around her, the guests who had laughed, sneered, and recorded now fidgeted in their seats, their conversations hushed, eyes darting nervously in her direction only to look away a second later. Dominic sat beside her, unbothered, one arm draped over the back of her chair, the other resting on the table like a silent warning to anyone thinking of approaching without a change of heart. Charlotte sipped her water, calm as ever, though her thoughts wandered, back to her classroom, her students, their smiling faces, their open hearts. She hadn't done any of this to be seen. But now that she had been truly seen, she would carry herself with the same dignity she taught her students to uphold. Somewhere near the edge of the ballroom, Vanessa Remy stood frozen, her perfectly poised expression now cracked, her fingers twitching against the clutch she clung to like a lifeline. Gone was the sharp-tongued queen of the gala. In her place stood a woman unraveling. Her phone buzzed in her hand, once, twice, 3 times, alerts and warnings pouring in. A whisper reached her ear. WellsCore was pulling funding from Remy Foundation events. Another came. Her name was trending online for all the wrong reasons. The clips of her sneering at Charlotte, throwing insults with theatrical flair, were already circulating on every major platform. Her voice, "Maybe try the service in trance next time, sweetheart," was being memed with captions like "Class has nothing to do with couture." The green silk woman who had spilled wine on Charlotte slinked toward the back of the room, her own phone lighting up with notifications as her sponsorship deal with a luxury skincare brand was publicly canceled. Their statement posted just minutes ago: "We do not stand with cruelty in any form. This partnership has ended, effective immediately." By morning, the ripple had become a wave. Every major news outlet picked up the story. Unknown woman humiliated at charity gala turns out to be billionaire's wife. Teachers shamed for simplicity sparks social reckoning. Dominic Wells breaks silence to defend wife in viral gala moment. Screenshots of Charlotte's quiet posture, seated beside Dominic, were plastered across Instagram and Twitter. Her head held high. Her dress ruined but her expression steady. "Grace over gold," one caption read. "Dignity doesn't need diamonds," another declared. The image of her standing beside her husband in that dress, still wearing the stains as if they were medals, became iconic. A symbol not of shame, but of strength. Those who had laughed found themselves facing consequences faster than they could issue apologies. Gerald Klein, the man in the velvet blazer who had scoffed the loudest, woke up to a boardroom full of fury. His company, Klein & Company, was blacklisted from WellsCore's vendor list. By noon, the firm's stock dropped by nearly 28%, and he was asked to resign. Meanwhile, influencers and socialites who had jeered were swiftly unfollowed and dropped by partners. The backlash wasn't orchestrated, it was organic. The public had decided who the villain was. And who the story truly belonged to. Back at Charlotte and Dominic's home, a modest, ivy-framed townhouse tucked away on a quiet block near Riverside, the morning sun filtered through the curtains. Charlotte sat at their kitchen table, sipping black coffee from her favorite chipped mug, its side painted with a child's messy drawing of a sunflower. It had been a gift from Layla, one of her brightest students, who always said sunflowers reminded her of Miss Hayes' smile. Dominic stood behind her, phone in hand, scanning headlines with a half-smile playing on his lips. "They're calling you the First Lady of Quiet Power," he murmured. Charlotte chuckled gently. "That's dramatic." He set the phone down and leaned in, his voice softer. "It's accurate." The doorbell rang. Charlotte stood to answer it, and found a courier holding a bouquet so large it nearly covered his face. "Delivery for Mrs. Charlotte Wells." She signed the slip and took the flowers inside, sunflowers, dozens of them, wrapped in paper with handwritten notes from children across the city. "Thank you for standing up. Thank you for being brave. You made us proud." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. These weren't tears of sorrow. They were rooted in something deeper. Something blooming. Later that evening, as the news cycle raged on and social media clung to every detail, Charlotte and Dominic returned to Halberton Manor, not for revenge, not even for recognition, but to quietly meet with the charity board. Clara Voss, the same board member who had approached Charlotte the night before, greeted them at the back entrance. Her demeanor was reverent. "We raised just over $12 million, she whispered, unable to hide the awe in her voice. "Most of it came in after everything." Charlotte simply nodded. "That's good," she said. "That'll do a lot of good." Clara hesitated, then added, "Would you consider taking a seat on our Education Outreach Committee?" Dominic glanced at Charlotte, waiting. But she didn't answer right away. She looked out over the now empty ballroom, imagining the laughter, the judgment, the flash of phones, and then the silence. Only, she said finally, if we keep the focus on the students. Not me. As they stepped back out into the night, a quiet breeze moved through the city streets. Charlotte reached for Dominic's hand and he gave it to her without hesitation. As they walked past doormen and traffic lights and brownstones bathed in golden lamplight, he pulled something from his coat pocket, a bouquet of sunflowers. Not store-bought. Hand-picked. Their stems still damp from the soil. He held them out to her with a soft smile. You don't need to shine, he said, his voice steady and low. You are the light. Charlotte took them gently, her fingers brushing his. And in that moment, surrounded by a city that was only just learning what grace looked like, she smiled. Behind them, Halberton Manor stood silent. The chandeliers inside no longer sparkled with the same arrogance. The laughter that once echoed off its walls had been replaced by reflection. And though Charlotte Hayes walked away in flats and linen, stained but unshaken, she had left a mark deeper than anyone could measure, a mark not on stone or reputation, but on conscience. And the world would not forget it. As the author of this story, I want to take a moment to reflect on what Charlotte Hayes' journey truly represents, and why it matters more today than ever before. Charlotte didn't walk into Halberton Manor seeking attention, validation, or status. She walked in with a heart full of purpose, hoping her quiet sacrifice might help children who don't always get a fair chance. And yet, the very people who claimed to support that cause turned on her the moment she didn't look like she belonged. They judged her by her shoes, her dress, her lack of glamour, forgetting that real value is never worn, it's lived. The lesson here is simple but powerful: never underestimate the quiet ones. Never assume someone's worth based on appearances. Dignity doesn't wear designer labels. Grace doesn't need a spotlight. And class? Real class is how you treat someone who can do nothing for you in return. In a world so obsessed with image and social status, Charlotte reminded us that humility is not weakness. It's strength. That standing silently in the face of cruelty takes more courage than shouting ever could. That sometimes, the most powerful voice in the room is the one that chooses not to scream, but to stand firm in truth. To those who've ever felt overlooked, disrespected, or dismissed, this story is for you. You are not invisible. You are not small. And when you carry yourself with integrity, even in the face of mockery, you shine in ways no spotlight ever could. Let people laugh. Let them doubt. Just keep walking, with your head high and your purpose intact. To our audience here at US Edifying Stories, thank you for spending your time with us. Every view, every comment, every shared moment of reflection means more than you know. We are building a community that believes in more empathy, more justice, more truth told through everyday people who rise above the noise. If this story touched your heart, if you saw a part of yourself in Charlotte Hayes, or if you simply believe the world needs more grace and less judgment, we invite you to share this message. Let's spread the reminder that no act of kindness, no stand for what's right, ever goes unnoticed. Until the next story, thank you for being part of something meaningful. Stay kind. Stay strong. And remember, you don't need to shine. You are the light.